Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government and political correspondent, and today we have a special guest, former Congressman Ron Kind. Ron, welcome to the show.
Jamie, it's a pleasure. It's been a while since we were able to do this together, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yes, I think we've been doing this better part of 2 decades, about 18 years or so that I've been doing these interviews, but our relationship goes further back than that. I remember meeting you, and we were both a bit younger, but it was 96 that we were both running for office and in parades together. So we'll have to catch the people up. Now, in fact, I think when I met you, you didn't have, were your sons born yet?
My first son was born a few days before that first primary in 96. Yeah. And then Matt came 2 years later. So yeah, it was a fresh beginning in a lot of respects, from running for office to starting a family. Talk about a chaotic time.
And now I suppose your boys are grown and they're done with college already?
Yeah, they're up and out. My youngest son, Matt, he's infantry commander for the Marine Corps at Camp Lejeune. He's soon to be deployed to the Middle East and Africa. Very proud of him after finishing college. And my oldest son, Johnny, is with an engineering firm actually here in La Crosse and enjoying that after having gone to school up at River Falls and playing linebacker for the football team up there. So Tony and I, that was our home away from home for a while, going up there every weekend to watch Johnny play college football up at River Falls.
Great. Well, we appreciate you coming on the show. And our viewers, the ones that have been around at least a decade, would remember the time when you were representing St. Croix County, your 3rd Congressional District that you represented for 26 years, 13 terms, runs from the Illinois border and at one time went up to Polk County. Then after the 2010 census, it was changed. I think you obtained, part of Stevens Point, or was it... and then...
Yeah, Stevens Point, Wisconsin Rapids, they moved me east and took away Polk and St. Croix County and moved a little bit closer to Madison too down there.
Okay, all right. So let's do a little history anyway, as far as with your representing. In fact, those 26 years, that qualifies you as one of the longer serving members, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think when I finally stepped down, retired from Congress, I was like 40th in seniority out of 435. So I'd been there for a while. And there are some pluses to that type of longevity: the experience, the relationship building, the trust that you need to develop in order to get things done. Because there has been a lot of turnover in Congress, the last few sessions in particular. There's a lot of pros and cons to that, fresh blood certainly, but a lot of inexperience and people I found that weren't coming for the right reasons. They were just coming for the microphone to push buttons, to get people riled up, and not really to help people or to get things done. And that's been, I think, an unfortunate trend lately in American politics.
Well, I have to ask, remind myself again, you are how old?
Just turned 60.
Okay. And so you're on that cusp of being considered a boomer, I guess, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think I qualify by like 1 or 2 years, boomer status.
Right. So with that, 60, a lot of people would want to retire at 60, but you're not retired. Is that correct? Completely?
No, actually, I had a nice transition. I hooked up with an international law firm called Arnold Porter in Washington, D.C. Got a great reputation. So I reinstated my law license, having been inactive for these past 26 years. Trying not to commit legal malpractice right now, but involved in some international tax, international trade issues, helping out with some clients that are involved in CRISPR technology, developing cures for rare diseases, which is really cool. So it keeps me kind of in that healthcare space that I devoted a lot of my time and attention in Congress with. So it's been a nice transition where it was an abrupt cutoff of the things that I cared about and that I was working on for the last 26 years, just in a different setting. But Wisconsin's still our home, so I'm bouncing back and forth to Washington still, where the firm's main headquarters is. But I'm able to also do a lot of the remote work here from Wisconsin. Family farm just north of La Crosse that we like to spend time on. We still have our place here on the Mississippi. So this is a tough place to be, especially in the summertime.
Yeah, right. A little sarcasm there, right?
Right.
So with that transition back into law, because you were a prosecutor before you ran for Congress, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I was prosecuting in Western Wisconsin, handled a lot of special prosecutions out of the Attorney General's office. So that got me out and about. And I really enjoyed that. The work in the courtroom, arguing cases in front of juries, representing the state as you are as a prosecutor. That was interesting practice. Before that, I was with a different law firm in Milwaukee for a couple of years, fresh out of law school. So yeah, with the legal background, it kind of made sense to reinstate the law license and reactivate those brain muscles again after not practicing the law for so long.
But
I was making law, actually.
Well, let's remind the folks too, what kind of committees were you on in your 13 terms in Congress?
Yeah, initially I was on the Education and Workforce Committee, which I loved, dealing with education, workforce development issues. I was on the Natural Resources Committee, the preservation of our resources. Of course, having the Mississippi here as our western border of the Congressional District, that was a key committee. On the Budget Committee, which gave me a view of the entirety of the federal work that we do at the federal level. But lately, for the last 16 years, I was on the Ways and Means Committee, and that's an exclusive committee. That means you can only serve on that committee because virtually all the economic issues pass that way. The tax and trade issues, we have jurisdiction over the entitlement program, Social Security, Medicare, healthcare policy. So it was really a fun committee to be involved with. And it was one of your smaller committees. So you really had a chance to get to know your colleagues on the committee, especially on the Republican side, develop those working relationships. For me, a lot of important friendships with Republican colleagues on the committee. And because of that, able to get a lot accomplished.
So you said you served 5 terms on the Ways and Means the last 10 years?
Yeah, the last 16 years, actually.
Last 16. So that would have taken you back to 2006. So you saw a swing from Bush to Obama, then to Trump, and then back to Biden.
Started with President Clinton way back when, and then it was President Bush and Obama and Trump and now President Biden.
So of those 16 years on Ways and Means, how many or did you serve in the majority and how many were you in the minority?
Yeah, I was in the majority 6 of those 16 years. So, actually 8 of those 16 years. So about half.
So about half and half. Okay. More fun to be in the majority, right?
It certainly is. But I found ways of being effective in the minority too, especially if you can work in a bipartisan fashion. I was very proud of my record of being one of the most bipartisan members of Congress, finding common ground with my colleagues across the aisle, working on issues together. And because of that, getting a lot of legislation passed. And I learned early on in the minority, if you're not afraid of who takes credit, you seek out a Republican colleague to introduce a bill and you put their name first because they're in the majority. And it will make it easier for that bill to be able to move through Congress then, since they are in the majority. And by doing that, a lot of my legislation that I came up with and partnered with the Republican were actually able to get signed into law.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but what comes to mind as far as examples of bipartisan legislation that you put forward?
Well, a lot of retirement security issues. We had a Secure Too Old bill to make it easier for people to plan and save for their retirement, especially workers in small businesses. There was a big black hole in retirement security for employees in small businesses that weren't offering 401ks or simple IRAs, for instance. So we made it easier for those businesses to set up multi-employer savings plans for their workers, some tax credits to make it cost effective, certain safe harbors so they didn't have to worry about liability concerns with it. A lot of trade policy. We were able to work in a bipartisan fashion, especially when it came to the elevation of worker and environmental standards and the enforceability things that are so crucial to effective trade agreements. If you have a trade agreement and you don't have the enforcement tools or mechanisms, it's basically meaningless because other countries can cheat then and not live up to the terms. So I was one of the leaders on trade policy in Congress, tax issue too, relief for family farmers, small businesses, and for working families. But probably one of my more enduring legacy legislative accomplishments was the creation of the Veterans History Project. And that's an attempt to get family members to sit down and have that conversation with family member, friend, or neighbor who served our country and ask them what it was like to serve our nation. And we're collecting those videos, archiving at the Library of Congress. They're digitizing it, making them available over the internet. And I'm proud that we've collected about 120,000 veteran stories so far and counting. I think it's an important part of American history that needs to be preserved. I conducted a lot of the interviews myself, from family members to just people in the Congressional District. And it's amazing to listen to people and what it was like for them to serve during times of conflict and during times of peace. And so that program is still going strong. And I'm actually acting as a kind of an unofficial advisor to the Veterans History Project with the Library of Congress, even today, helping with the coalition building and the outreach to veterans groups.
Okay. So you would consider, among these accomplishments that you just rattled off, the ones that were bipartisan are the ones that you're most proud of?
Yeah, and they're the ones that, if they're not bipartisan, it's hard to find a path to get them enacted into law. And they're also more long-lasting, because then the appropriations are a little bit easier to fund these programs if there's bipartisan support for it. And yeah, and every year there's surveys that go out ranking each member of Congress in regards to how bipartisan or not that they are. And I was always in the top 5 out of 435 in my bipartisan work. And I did that because I knew that was the way to be most effective. But I also did it because I thought I was representing my district. And I kept reminding my staff throughout the years that if I wasn't taking incoming or criticism from the far left or the far right, I probably wasn't representing the 3rd Congressional District all that well, because I always viewed it as a more moderate centrist type of district, a lot of independent swing voters in it. People who send me to Washington expecting me to be a grown-up, get in the same room and work together and get things done rather than just be a bomb thrower every day. I found through the years there are too many of those in Congress serving, not getting things done, but just to divide our nation even more. And that was never part of my DNA.
Well, so you really did try to follow in the footsteps or lead like one of your early mentors, Bill Proxmire, right?
Yeah, that's right. I cut my political teeth with Prox when he was senator from Wisconsin, investigated a lot of his Golden Fleece Awards, which was an award he gave out monthly for the most ridiculous expenditure of taxpayer dollars. Wrote some of his floor speeches on the need to ratify the Anti-Genocide Treaty after the Second World War. We were the first signatory to the treaty, but never ratified it for a variety of reasons. And Prox, every day when the Senate was in session, would deliver a speech reminding his colleagues of this moral imperative that we had to ratify it. And he also became a strong voice on the need for nuclear disarmament rather than a nuclear arms race, given the existential threat that posed to our very existence on the planet. And I'm sure if you were still around today, you'd probably be talking a lot about the threat of global warming, climate change, and what it's doing.
No doubt. Yes,
planet.
I would agree.
Him and Gaylord Nelson. Yeah.
I recall Proxmire, that was one of the things that defined him was the ability to reach across the aisle. He voted with his own party only about 63% of the time.
Yeah, and I think people from Wisconsin rewarded him every election because he didn't have to fundraise. He didn't have to spend a lot of money. He was notorious for traveling the state nonstop, shaking hands wherever he went. But virtually everyone, when Prox was serving, had a story of how they encountered him or shook his hand at some event or some restaurant or some ball game. He was relentless in that, and I think it served him well.
Yes. Well, talk a little bit now about, you mentioned some other events that have happened since you left Congress. I heard something about an award that you received, honor.
I did. It's kind of a unique award. I wasn't quite sure what it meant, but King Charles, shortly after he was coronated this year, awarded me an OBE, which is an Officer of the Highest Order of the British Empire. And it was based on the work I did to enhance and strengthen the U.S.-UK relationship, one of our most crucial allies, from national security to diplomacy, economically. I was co-chairing the U.S.-UK caucus for a number of years, also co-chaired the Interparliamentary Working Group. That's the relationship that members of Congress have with parliamentarians in Great Britain. And because of that, the government over there wanted to recognize me with an OBE. I checked right away after I was awarded to see if it came with sleeping privileges at Buckingham Palace. It does not. I thought, well, with 600 rooms, when I'm in London, I just, be quiet and just crash in one of them. But now they drew a hard line on that request. But it doesn't come with a sir title. I'm not a knight, so you don't have to call me sir.
Okay. No, no,
It's just
no title there. But have you been to the UK since getting that award?
No, I'm supposed to be heading over there this fall. They're going to be doing a formal ceremony at the British Embassy in Washington for the OBE presentation. And then I've got actually some business in London. And so there might be an opportunity of seeing if King Charles is available for a quick medal presentation ceremony when I'm in town.
Great. Now, you mentioned how you go back and forth, I'm sorry, between Washington and La Crosse. Do you travel anywhere else for your work now?
Yeah, they've got, the firm I'm with has offices all over the place, from Chicago to Houston to San Francisco to New York, obviously overseas to London, Brussels. So they got me hopping pretty well with that. But yeah, Tawny and we were both raised here in Western Wisconsin. This is where we raised our family. This is our home. And so we still have a place on the Mississippi. We still have our small family farm halfway between La Crosse and Eau Claire. We like to spend time out there. So it's been kind of back and forth, not that unlike the years when I was in Congress, when I was back and forth every weekend so I could get home and travel and work the district and meet people during that time. It's less frequent when I have to do that, but it's still a pretty good balance between the work I can do virtually remote here in Wisconsin and when I have to be in the DC office.
All right. You talked a little about some of the things that you were proud of and the bipartisan work that you did. How about the things that didn't get done? And I'm just raising one for an example, because I remember shortly after you were elected, I went to one of your listening sessions and spoke about, the need to make sure that we ensure Social Security gets extended. Because we get the annual notices when you get to be our age about, what your benefits will be and so forth. And it's showing that, there's no certainty beyond whatever. I think the year is 2032 now. And while Tip O'Neill and Ron Reagan in, I think it was 85, were able to extend Social Security by raising the eligibility age for full retirement a few years, nothing's been done since the mid-'80s. Why do you think that is, and what are the chances that something gets done?
Yeah, you're right, Jamie. And Social Security is such an important, vital program affecting the lives of hundreds of millions of people here in this country. I mean, everyone virtually relies on it. And it's important that Congress takes steps to maintain its solvency so it doesn't run short of the funds with the promises that were made. And it's going to require bipartisan compromise of both sides coming together and finding a fix for it, just as you mentioned, Tip O'Neill, Ronald Reagan was able to do back in '83. But nothing really significant since that time. And demographics are working against us right now. We have a rapidly aging population in our country, fewer workers per retiree. And so just the numbers don't add up. And that's why it's crucial that the steps be taken as soon as possible so they're less painful out in the future. We still have a little bit of time, and it's not like it's going to go completely broke. Even if nothing is done, we can still honor about 80% of the Social Security promise to everyone indefinitely. But there is that shortfall that will have to be addressed, and the sooner the better. And the same can be said of Medicare. I mean, with the aging population, as you grow older, you consume more healthcare. And of the two, Medicare is in more dire straits than Social Security, just because of the increased cost of healthcare. And in that category of, I wish we could have done more. I wish we could have accelerated the way we pay for healthcare so it's value and outcome based and no longer volume based payments. By that, I mean, for so long in healthcare, we've been paying for tests and services and procedures and things done to us regardless of results. And that's bankrupting families, businesses, our government budgets. And I led the effort during the Affordable Care Act debate to move that payment system to a value-based payment system with quality measurements so that healthcare providers get rewarded for good results rather than just for doing more. And that was one way of getting a better bang for the buck and better outcomes for people too. And more work needs to be done on that front.
Well, what do you think will be the key? Just take one of those, like Social Security. Everyone refers to it as the third rail, but there's, conservative ideas on, all the way up to getting rid of it, phasing it out over time. And then there's folks like Bernie Sanders who says, no, let's make even more people eligible and just increase the amount of the benefit. So what do you think is going to have to be done? What would be the one chip, if you will, from each side to throw into this to extend that program?
Yeah, I think there is an area of compromise here. Obviously, Republicans are loath to talk about increasing the FICA cap. And right now, there's a cap on the amount a person earns and what they contribute to Social Security. If you were to lift that cap and ask wealthier Americans to continue paying into Social Security above where it's set today, I think it's like around 140, 145,000, and you no longer pay into Social Security for every dollar you earn above that, that alone would go a long ways to filling that gap. But if you would also have a truer, more accurate reflection of inflation in Social Security, that too would find some cost savings. And that's something that Democrats don't really like to talk about, as some potential benefit, not a reduction, but not a growth as fast as what is currently projected. And, that's where I think the bipartisan compromise, but it's going to require both sides to give a little bit and take a little bit in order to fix that. I just hope Congress doesn't punt and set up some nonpartisan commission to look at it, produce a report only for it to collect dust. That's been done so many times and no action. And yet there's no real crisis in front of Congress today on Social Security. It's still years out. And so it's tough to get members of Congress to really focus on this or to make the hard decisions if their back isn't up against the wall.
Okay. You mentioned how you were pushing the value-based way of pricing for healthcare. Is there anybody left that would take up that mantle?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening. It's just at a slower pace than I would have liked because, again, Medicare is in financial trouble. Over half of Medicare payments now are value-based. A lot of because of the programs I was able to put in place. We set up this Center on Innovation, different payment models that will reward good outcomes, setting up quality measurements. And now with all the data analysis and collection that we have, we can collect all that and find out what works and what doesn't work as far as the treatment of people, and then drive that information into the hands of doctors and patients so they can make good decisions with it. I mean, Epic, the HIT company down there outside of Madison, they have over half of the market for electronic medical records, and they're just a vacuum cleaner collecting all this data, working with a company like that to establish best practices and a way of getting that information back into the hands of providers and patients, I think would go a long way to solving the financial hardship that we currently have in paying for healthcare in this country. And I'm glad that under the Inflation Reduction Act, a bill that we passed last year, that we're finally going to have price negotiating power at the federal level. The pharmaceutical industry was the only private industry doing business with the federal government where the federal government was prohibited from even discussing price, of even being able to negotiate any price with them. That now has been lifted. And in a few weeks, we're going to get the first 10 prescription drug medications that will be subject to price negotiation. And that has the potential of driving that price down significantly for seniors, especially that need these prescription drugs for their health. So things like that are happening, but we can't waste too much time because, again, with the demographics and the aging of our population, we're in a bit of a race against time here.
You know, you mentioned Bill Proxmire and his Golden Fleece Awards and so forth, but, there is a place for government spending. And what about the Infrastructure Act that passed, and what do you see that? Because now we're seeing all these people who were working against it taking credit and wanting front row seats at these dedication ceremonies.
Yeah, there's a phrase for that, voting no, but taking the dough. And I see a lot of my Republican friends doing just that. They're showing up at the ribbon cuttings. They're taking credit for the new bridge or the new highway or the new airport that's being worked on in their congressional district. It's a little hypocritical and disingenuous, but it always happens. But it was important that we got this done. I mean, if I had a nickel every time we had Infrastructure Week out in Washington, we were going to take action and finally get a major infrastructure bill done, I'd be a very rich person. But under President Biden's leadership, and he deserves a lot of credit because of the relationships he had in the Senate, having served in the Senate himself, that we were finally able to pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill to rebuild America and rebuild Wisconsin the way it needs to be, dealing with our roads and highways and bridges and ports and airports. We were literally in certain places becoming a third world nation when it came to our infrastructure, with bridges falling down and ports failing. And there's a lot of good paying jobs that come from this, and it will be a gift that keeps giving for a number of years. One of my prouder accomplishments in representing the St. Croix area was finally getting the Stillwater Bridge done. I mean, it was long overdue with that old drawbridge in Stillwater,
Right.
rickety and shaking when trucks would pass it. And we were finally able to move forward on that new bridge to alleviate congestion and the efficiency of drivers up there. And it turned out to be aesthetically pleasing too, I might add. So yeah, it was important that we got that infrastructure bill done. And included in it was major funding for rural broadband expansion to make sure we're not leaving anyone behind when it comes to high-speed internet access, which is crucial. Without it, these rural small communities are going to die because the young people are not going to live in a place that doesn't have internet connection. They're going to go somewhere else. And that would be a recipe for disaster for rural America.
Well, you mentioned two accomplishments, the Medicare, the negotiation of the pharmaceuticals, as well as the infrastructure, something that was fought for well over a decade, goes back to the Obama administration where those ideas were started. Nothing could seem to get done. It would get advanced and then it would fall apart. One of those other areas that nothing did get accomplished is, we haven't talked about is the either border security, depending on how you look at it, or immigration reform. We had the famous Gang of Eight that was very close to major immigration reform under the Bush administration, which started again after you were already in Congress. But that all dissipated, and now the camps seem to be so entrenched on the far extremes. Do you see anything getting done on that?
Yeah, it's long overdue, Jamie. We need comprehensive immigration reform, and it's going to require enhanced border security. I mean, people need to have the confidence that we're in control of our own borders and we know who's entering, and they should be entering legally and not just crossing on their own. But we also need workers in this economy. I mean, the last few years, even before COVID hit, the number one concern I heard from businesses large and small when I was out visiting them was the need for more workers in order to meet their expansion needs, in order to just fill positions that are going unfilled. And unfortunately, there again, demographics are working against us in this country with an aging population, 70 million baby boomers beginning their massive retirement and leaving the workforce. We have a declining birth rate in this country. So the only other place we can look to for workers is through enhanced immigration policy. Why we're not stamping a green card on every foreign student graduating from our university and saying, hey, since we educated you, we'd like you to stay here rather than going home to compete against us. It's nonsensical. So it's going to require that type of give and take and bipartisan cooperation, Democrats recognizing that we need to invest more on border security in the South, especially, and Republicans recognizing we need a more liberal immigration policy of allowing people into this country, both high-skilled and lower-skilled workers, because there's a need for both right now in our economy. And that's one thing that's going to jeopardize. We were just talking about Social Security and Medicare. If we don't have the workers in the workforce contributing to those programs, it's going to accelerate their demise and make it harder for us to meet those obligations. So hopefully calmer heads will prevail. As you mentioned, there were 2/3 of the senators that voted on a comprehensive package during the Bush administration. We couldn't get the Republican leadership in the House to take it up. I'm confident if they did, we would have had the votes in the House to pass it, and that would have been a tremendous accomplishment. But it was a missed opportunity, and it's an opportunity waiting to be had again if the parties can figure out a way to work together.
Do you think one reason it fell apart was the fact that northern states like Wisconsin and so forth aren't as affected by the issues that go on at the border, that it wasn't a high enough priority, and then it led to the Trump administration, which was a key campaign point of his, and why he points to why he was elected was border security. Now, since he's left office, we've had the Texas governor, the Florida governor sending immigrants and people seeking asylum to other states like, Martha's Vineyard and New York and so forth. Do you think that's helped, or has it hurt the cause of trying to come to a solution?
Yeah, it's just become too politicized, Jamie. I mean, in both sides, unfortunately, I like to play the political card when it comes to immigration. But again, I give President Biden some credit. When the COVID immigration policies were expiring, he had a plan in place earlier this year to deal with the tidal wave, potential tidal wave of immigrants crossing the southern border. We have not seen that because of what was instituted in the Biden administration. The numbers have declined significantly. Now, my Republican colleagues won't recognize that or acknowledge it or give him any credit, but what he's doing is working by setting up a more systematic approach for refugee status, for instance, applying for immigration status in our country, rather than people just crossing the border. But it's a political hot potato. It will be this next presidential race, especially if Donald Trump is still one of the candidates. He will continue to push that button. And it's the easiest card to play, as you know well, Jamie, in politics, is blame it on foreigners, blame it on people who don't look like us, act like us, talk like us, and let them be the scapegoat for everything that's going on and create that fear in people in this country that we can't have those type of people here. And that's the political card that's being played, which makes finding some solution very difficult.
Will anything really get done between now and November of 24?
Yeah, there's still some opportunities, I think. There's a lot of implementation based on what we did get done in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, the CHIPS Act, so we can start making our own microchips, which is vital to the modern economy right here in America. We got the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, which, by the way, is the largest action and investment we're taking to combat climate change ever in this country, by making it easier for people to invest in renewable and sustainable energy for their homes, their businesses. We've got the explosion of the electric car fleets right now, the generation of wind and solar and geothermal, the deployment of technology, which is more energy efficient. That alone has the potential of reducing carbon emissions by over 1/3 overnight. And we don't even have to invent anything. We just need to deploy that, what already has been invented and what works. And so it was a very bold move that we took. And unfortunately, Republicans in Congress are doing everything they can to upend it, to repeal it, which would basically be, raising the white surrender flag to climate change. And if you think Maui and Lahaina was an anomaly, well, guess what? We're going to get a lot more Lahainas in this country as long as we don't take aggressive action to combat this before it's too late.
Well, we could go on for another hour, but I want to just ask you, any further political aspirations in your future?
26 years was a long time, Jamie. It was a great honor to be able to represent my home area, the 3rd Congressional District, for as long as I did. But I just ran out of gas. I mean, doing that for so long, the travel back and forth, a very large district, about 5 hours from north to south down to the Illinois border, always on the road, it tends to wear you down. And so I felt comfortable with the decision that I made, excited about the next chapter. It's kind of fun being able to have some weekends with your family again and be able to plan things without the obligations of a congressional district to have to worry about and tend to. So no, I don't really see that right now in my future.
Okay. Is the door open even that much? Because your name is still thrown around for Senate or governor races.
Well, I don't know about running for office again, but if the right opportunity came for public service to help someone, to be appointed to something, I would be hard pressed to say no. I kind of have that in my blood. And I know it's important that people get involved in a way to help out in their communities. So you never say never, but right now we're kind of happy with this transition. I wish my successor all the luck, and I hope he does right by the people back home. A couple of weeks ago, wasn't too inspiring though, when he went off on a tirade against Senate pages in the rotunda of the Capitol during a midnight tour that he was giving, which was very uncalled for. You have to do a lot as a freshman to have the majority and minority leaders of the U.S. Senate take the floor of the Senate to condemn your action the night before. And that's exactly what happened to Derek Van Orden based on what he did to those poor Senate pages. They're 16, 17-year-olds just trying to rest in the rotunda. And he just went off on them and just cussing up a storm against them. And apparently it was after a booze party in his congressional office in Washington, pictures showing booze bottles and beer cans on his desk and in the garbage can. So I don't think that's the type of representation people hope or expect here in the 3rd. And we'll see.
Yeah, I guess to comment on that, do you and your predecessor. I'm blanking on his name again.
Steve Gunderson?
Steve Gunderson. So moderate Republican, you were a moderate Democrat. That has been kind of the legacy here in the 3rd Congressional District, goes up and down, rural and includes a few university towns or whatever. But do you see him, so far, is he, leading in a way that's consistent with that moderate image?
No, he really isn't. And it's unfortunate too. I was hoping he would be able to grow in his office, understand the responsibility and who he's really representing. But he's very partisan in his approach. Doesn't seem that interested in trying to work with the other side and find some common ground. And then you have instances like that in the Capitol. I remind people he was part of the January 6th insurrection. He was part of that mob that assaulted the Capitol. He was on the wall of the Capitol that day. And for him now to claim that the pages were somehow being disrespectful to the U.S. Capitol when he was actually there on January 6th and didn't say boo about the activity that all of his colleagues were engaged in that day, I think it's just the height of hypocrisy.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Ron. I think we will ask you to come back, especially as we get closer to the election in November of 24 and, analyze some of the issues and the direction the country's heading. Would you be willing to do that?
Anytime to spend a little bit of time with you, Jamie, I'm all in. So always happy.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate your time. And thank you for all the insights that you've given. Thank you for your leadership over 26 years. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you, Jamie. Appreciate it.
And I want to thank our viewers for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.